Located at the heart of the Apennine Peninsula, surrounded by oak forests, the town of Greccio is perched high atop one of the hills overlooking the Rheatina Valley, also known as the Sacred Valley. According to tradition, a Greek family founded Greccio as a colony and settled down in this land after falling in love with the beauty of the surrounding countryside, hence the origin of the name Greccio. The earliest records documenting this medieval town, however, date back to the 10th and 11th centuries. They show how from the remains of the ancient buildings, Greccio became a fortified medieval castle, surrounded by walls and protected by 6 watchtowers. And just over 1 mile away from the walled town, the inhabitants of Greccio witnessed the creation of an extraordinary event, which is very much still alive today all over the world, the tradition of the Nativity scene. It all began in the year 1223. Back from the Holy Land, a young hermit named Francis, known as the Poor Man of Assisi, passed through this valley on his way back home. Struck by the breathtaking beauty of the countryside, which reminded him so much of the holy city of Bethlehem, Francis of Assisi had the idea of reliving the mystery of the birth of the Son of God. For this reason, he didn't doubt for a moment on the help of the local inhabitants, the citizens of Greccio.
Francesco aveva un desiderio, il desiderio di...
Francis had one dream, to relive with his own eyes what newborn Jesus had suffered for humanity. And this dream of his came true on Christmas Eve 1223, when he asked his friend and owner of these caves, Giovanni di Greccio, known as Il Velita, to prepare in that cave what was needed for the event. All Francis needed was a stone, which is still there, a bit of hay, an ass, an ox, and an altar. Some say there was also a baby, a simulacrum. Others don't mention this simulacrum at all. But during the celebration, Giovanni Velita and others have a vision. On the stone they see a baby waking up from a long sleep. The baby smiles at Francis, and Francis embraces him and adores him.
Sonno lungo e sorride a Francesco. E Francesco lo abbraccia e lo adora.
And it was exactly in this place where, in 1228, the hermitage of Greccio Sanctuary was erected. It was the same year the church celebrated the canonization of the Saint of Assisi. The beating heart of the Hermitage Sanctuary of Greccio is the cave known as the Chapel of the Crib. In this place, on the altar, you can see a section of the original stone on which St. Francis placed a representation of Jesus during the first living nativity scene in 1223. The frescoes that adorn the front walls of the chapel and the cave depict 2 closely interwoven scenes, the Nativity in Bethlehem and the Nativity in Greccio. In the foreground of this latter fresco, Francis, clad in the white robe of a deacon, is kneeling in adoration of the child, and a bit above, the priest is celebrating Mass. In the background are the other protagonists of this wonderful event, among them Giovanni Velita, his wife, and all the people of Greccio.
La notte del Natale del 1223.
The very first time in history the nativity scene was represented was here, on Christmas Eve in 1223. And because it was the first time, they had no reference to guide them. Greccio was indeed a rather atypical nativity scene, a bit different from what we can find now in Italian families and all over the world. It's the only one without the Virgin Mary and Joseph, because it was created with people from Greccio, so St. Francis, Giovanni Velita, the people of Greccio, and then others like the shepherds of the Arieti Valley, and so on.
La fece da padrona.
Since that very distant year, every Christmas, the inhabitants of Greccio have relived with pride these historic moments.
Ogni anno rivochiamo questi fatti perché fanno
We
parte.
relive these events every year because they form part of our history, part of our heart, and also part of the iconographic heritage, which is universal, which is acknowledged as universal, even though sometimes it's also, well, the victim of too much talking, because no religion is in contrast with the nativity scene and its iconography. Different people have different opinions, and this is good. But the nativity is something that unites us rather than divides us, and so Greccio too unites and doesn't divide.
Quindi Greccio unisce e non divide.
Mi chiamo Federico.
My name is Federico, and in the Nativity I represent St. Francis. I've been representing Francis for 8 years, but I was part of this even before, ever since I was 6. I'm 43 now, so I've been in this for quite a while.
Bene a voi, popolo prediletto.
Sia rappresentare la figura di San Francesco, ma anche
I feel this thing also belongs to me, representing St. Francis, but also the common person from the people. It's all very emotional. If we all create our own nativity scenes today, it's because St. Francis created the first here on that night. So, of course, the most moving part is the last, where Francis built the nativity for the first time in history.
nell'atto di realizzare il presepe vivente vero e proprio.
Mi chiamo Natalino.
My name is Natalino, and I've been part of the Nativity of Greccio for 8 years now. For me, this is a great experience, seeing St. Francis by my side, very near me. And what else can I say? I'm fascinated by my role as the Lord of Greccio, happy to help the saint represent the Nativity in Greccio back in 1223.
Nel rappresentare il presepio di Greccio nel lontano 1223.
Thanks for watching. Stick around for more on Vaticano. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
Sì, la rievocazione storica del primo presepe del mondo. Così.
The historical reenactment of the first nativity scene in the world, this is the official name of our event here in Greccio. It is not a living nativity scene, but the historical reenactment of the first nativity scene in the world. And with some changes over the years, it all started back in 1973. That year, a historical reenactment was put on in area of the Hermitage, and then the area very close around it. At the time, it consisted of 4 living tableaus. We're talking about tableaus with real people. They talk, act, they're very much alive. Today we have 6 scenes, The first scene represents the arrival of St. Francis in Greccio. This happened in around 1209. The saint came to Greccio probably by boat, crossing Lake Velino, which is nearby. He settled on Mount Lacerone at 1,216 meters, about 4,000 feet above sea level, and there he built himself a little refuge. These are respectively the first and second tableaus. After this, we move on to the relations of St. Francis with the inhabitants of Greccio. They come to know that up on the mountain, at the time the mountain was the source of wealth and life, there's this pious man, and together with Giovanni Vellina, the lord of the town, they decide to go up to him and invite him into the town and the castle. And this is the fourth tableau, the arrival of Francis in Greccio. He enters the town right here, right behind me. We're inside the walls here. And he starts preaching from a stone which is kept inside a small chapel. And he calls for the values of life, not only the word of God, but also other important values like unity. The people of Greccio are enthralled, and they are struck by Francis's charisma. They ask him to stay and live in the town and castle. Francis would love to be closer to them, but he refuses because he says, "It's not in my nature." And legend has it that the holy man also said that he would live wherever landed the burning firebrand thrown by a child from the mountain into the valley. The firebrand landed in the exact spot where today stands the hermitage. At the time, there were caves there, owned by Il Velita, who immediately donated them to Francis and his friends. The fifth tableau tells the story of the meeting of Francis with Pope Honorius. You know, it was very easy at the time to be sent to the stake. It was enough to propose changes or show initiative that either veered from or went right against the official doctrine of the Church. Pope Honorius thought very highly of Francis, and for this he granted him permission for the Nativity scene to be built in Greccio. And so, very much excited, Francis comes back to Il Velita. They talk, they get everything ready, and here we are, the sixth and final tableau, the Nativity scene.
E arriviamo al quadro sesto, la scena della Natività.
The cave of the crib, located inside the hermitage of Greccio, is only one of the many treasures hidden inside the walls of this sacred place.
Vi erano altre due grotte ai tempi di Francesco. Una era questa, dove
There were other caves at the time of Francis. This one, for instance, where they used to eat. Eat, they say, as poor people used to eat. Francis liked to say, eating as poor people do. And so it happened that one day, after being away for a while, he came back and found the friars here on Christmas Day, and they had set up a table with a tablecloth. Francis wouldn't enter the cave. He said, "You've betrayed my spouse, Poverty," and he refused to enter. There's another cave right here behind me, and this was used as a dormitory. At the very end of this cave, there's a little corner where Francis used to sleep. Those few times he actually stopped by, Francis would simply lean against that rock. And here, too, there's a little anecdote regarding Francis, because one evening, Giovanni Vellita, the Lord of Greccio, gave Francis a pillow as a present, a feather pillow. He said to him, "Francis, you're so young, and yet look so gaunt. Rest a bit." And he gives him this feather pillow. Francis accepts the gift and thanks Giovanni. But early the next morning he calls his friends and says, "Last night I couldn't sleep a wink because the devil tempted me, telling me he is not comfortable on the cross, but you are comfortably sleeping on the pillow." And yes, I think this says a lot to us modern people, because we're never happy with what we've got.
Per noi moderni oggi dice molto che non ci contentiamo mai di niente.
Before we left this land, so much loved by St. Francis of Assisi, Father Domenico shared with us the memory of when Pope Francis unexpectedly visited the Hermitage Sanctuary of Greccio last Christmas season, the 4th of January 2016.
E all'improvviso compare Francesco con la macchina.
Suddenly, Francis leaves his car in the parking lot and shows up. He comes down alone with the bishop, a bit ahead of him. And without warning any of us friars, he finds the first part of the cave open, but the second closed. And then, little by little, word spreads among us friars that he was here, and we ran to him from all corners, and he embraced all of us, very simply, in the true spirit of a Franciscan. We all liked that very much, and the beautiful thing was also the present he gave us. 3 lines on our big guest book. Since I'm the chronicler, I brought the big book to him so he could sign it. And he wrote 3 lines. I'll try to remember them from memory. I thank God for this grace, and I ask him to bless the church, the Bishop of Rieti, the friars, and all the faithful, and that he may help us look for the star so we can find the child. In these words, there's all of Pope Francis.
Per trovare il bambino. Ecco, in queste pochissime parole c'è tutto Francesco, Papa Francesco.
For Father Domenico, the fact that Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio chose the name of Francis is not accidental at all. In him and his magisterium, this frail Franciscan friar sees the teachings of the Saint of Assisi. And like the saint himself, he's sure that Pope Francis will come across many difficulties in his path.
Ma come Francesco I, che sarebbe San Francesco, è stato...
Like Francis I, that is, Saint Francis, he was opposed to poverty. Things were not always easy. The first group of friars argued a lot, we can say now, because some wanted more poverty, others wanted less poverty. And St. Francis himself was sorry for this. And he would say, you don't want to follow the rule to the letter. Or, as he would put it, sine glossa, sine glossa, sine glossa, which means without commentary and additions. Absolute poverty was the rule for Francis, because he thinks there is a merciful Father who can provide for all. And Francis said, if he can provide for the birds in the sky and the dormice, and we have many dormice here, why, he will undoubtedly provide for all of us, people of little faith. Pope Francis is trying to instill this message in all of us, not just us Christians, but all society, to not be greedy at all cost, and not to have to own, but to have so that we can give. There's more joy in giving than in receiving.
C'è più gioia nel dare che nel ricevere.
As the sun sets, the hermitage sanctuary of Greccio divests itself of its ornaments and remains sculpted in the rock like an eagle's nest, showing itself in its total sincerity as the new Bethlehem to our eyes. It is without the shadow of a doubt one of the most important places of the Franciscan order.